the relationship between a director and a costume designer is hugely important, because think about it, all your principal characters are partially being created by your costume designer. I mean, that's, and it's speaking to the audience. It's not about who the person is, but who they're pretending to be, because it's an actor dressed as someone else. Particularly when you're doing a period film, it's a shorthand. You've got to say, this is what this character's wearing, and the audience has got to ask a question. Audiences are always asking questions if you're a good filmmaker. Your obligation as a filmmaker is get audience to ask questions. And one of the questions they've got to ask is who this person is. And you don't always want to tell them. You want to set up various complexities or inconsistencies. So what was brilliant about Molly's design work is I would give the broad strokes. I wrote these long documents about what the film was about and what I envisioned the characters being. But then I leave it to my key creative collaborators to then run with it and create their own narrative from their own understanding of both the story and of the characters.
So we start our chat right now. We are here to talk about The Last Call. The Last Call is a new released film, and it tells the last days of life of the poet Dylan Thomas, which was who was the first rock star, a rock star ante litteram. And he died when he was just 39 years old, because he was self-destructive too, a genius self-destructive.
And of course we are here with the director of the movie, Steven Bernstein. Thank you, Steven, to be with us. And with the costume designer of the movie, Molly Maginnis. Thank you, Molly, too. Because the relationship between director and costume designer is really deep. We from the Dark Ending, we know this, and we explore all these situations very often. And we'll find out why during this chat.
And I would say to start with a brief presentation for the, for the few people who doesn't know you. A brief presentation. We can start with the director. Steven, if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Briefly.
Briefly or whatever you want. We are
Take
here.
your time.
We love to chat with you.
Dangerous thing to say to a writer. Please introduce yourself. I think the film was like one long sentence that originally ran for like 3 hours, and that's probably true of my introduction. Now it's much more compelling than it was when it first began. Look, I began as a writer really in theater in the UK. But then having worked in television, they would combine the job of writer and director. And I would do both those things. And then somehow through this very strange journey, which we don't have time here to discuss, music videos emerged in Britain as a significant form of art. And people were asking me not to direct them, but to shoot them as a cinematographer because I had access to cameras. So I shot a few of them just for fun. Suddenly they became these enormous videos. The industry took off, and I was shooting hundreds of music videos in England in the 80s. That led to commercials, including working with the fabulous Tony Kaye. We won the Cannes Golden Lion, and that led to feature films. And suddenly I was shooting, not directing, feature films, oddly, while writing theater pieces. So I was working in theater as a writer, and I was working in cinema as a cinematographer. And then I had good fortune, and then I shot some of the most successful films of a 20-year period. I shot a film called Like Water for Chocolate in Mexico. I shot the films of Noah Baumbach, who went on to get several Oscar nominations. And then I shot, of course, Monster with Charlize Theron, which actually won the Oscar. And then I shot films like SWAT and so on. And, all the while thinking, how did I get on this road? And like so many of us do, you suddenly find yourself maybe in the second half of your life, and you're thinking, how did I get here? And then I realized that with the success that Monster gave me, it was time to go back to where I began and combine my two crafts of both writer and filmmaker, and then wrote a film called Decoding Annie Parker, which starred Helen Hunt and Samantha Morton both Oscar nominees. Helen actually won an Oscar. Aaron Paul and Rashida Jones, a very big cast. Had some success with that, and then went on to do this film, which Last Call, with John Malkovich and Rhys Ifans and Romola Garai and Rodrigo Santoro, originally from a stage play of mine, which then I changed and made much more visual, and made it into a movie. Wrote a book or two along the way and some other things, but that's the short form of my life.
Which is impressive. And your career is impressive too, Molly. Can you introduce yourself briefly again? Because
sure. Well, I always think I am the luckiest person ever because I've only been a costume designer. I love doing it. I have always loved doing it. After I got my master's degree, I went right to New York thinking, oh, I'm going to be on Broadway, blah, blah, blah. And I designed theater for quite a while. I designed opera. I designed ballets. I finally had my Broadway show, and I worked on it for an entire year and made $11,000. I said,
it's a start.
I don't think I can afford a microwave oven. I need to figure out how to do this. And I've always been a movie addict since I was a little kid. That's like the whole black and white thing, which from the time I was maybe 10 years old, I spent every Sunday watching 5 movies in a row on TV. So I said, where can I succeed? And I thought, I want to be a film designer. I love movies. So I wiggled my way out to LA and was very lucky to have a good, solid career. You mentioned As Good as It Gets. Broadcast news was probably my first big picture. I just watched Sister Act the other night, was on TV, and I said, wow, that was a lot of fun. So, I mean, I've been busy. After 2008, the industry changed greatly, like the whole economy. And I found myself moving more to television. A lot of directors were looking for film designers who really dug deeper into character and could give television a more epic feeling. And so I've been doing a lot of TV series, and, you know, it's just long form drama. And I consider myself, I'm not a fashion designer, I'm a storyteller, and I'm here to serve Steven. I mean, I just fell for Steven. I think our first meeting was online, right?
Online, yes.
And after it, I was like, that was so much fun to really talk to somebody who is also a storyteller and not concerned with labels or any nonsense like that, but really getting to the meat of the character. And, you know, it was not a huge budget film, so it required some careful maneuver.
It's very important to have a feeling, no? Director, also with all the head of the departments, no? The costume designer, of course, the production designer.
Right, and we just continued talking, meeting. So when it really came time to find the right clothes or design the right clothes, you know, I felt like I had a clear idea of Steven's vision. And I'm so happy. I haven't seen the whole film, but I've seen cuts of it. And just the use of like light and dark and the crowd scenes, as well as our principals, just like blew me away. It's just what I had hoped it would be. I think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous film, what I've seen so far.
One of the most unique voices of our generation. Dylan Thomas.
Things fall apart. The center cannot hold.
Memory, what a mess. It's as much fiction as it is truth.
This tour, not enjoying a single moment of it. What do I have to show for it?
Love is a word so often used, it's lost on me.
What the hell do you mean when you say I have taken your life? It broke my heart!
Your heart! It gave you an excuse!
Don't even know him.
So much easier to love people we don't know, don't you think?
what's remarkable about what Molly did is you can take a single frame from the film where you see Catelyn, played by the iridescent Romola Garai. And just by the way she's dressed, not only do you get a sense of her relative wealth or poverty, what she once was and what she has become, but you get a sense of her ennui, her interior sadness all through the wardrobe. I'm absolutely serious in this. There's a series of sequences where she's writing a letter to her errant husband. And simply through her performance, but in the way Molly has dressed her, you completely understand the character and what's happened in their lives. Because I don't know how Molly did this, but there's a tawdriness to it. They were highly educated, intellectuals, but they were alcoholics who were both bent on destruction. And somehow she embodied that in the way, particularly Romola was just, but also the way Dylan. How did you do that, Molly?
Well, of course, Rhys does not resemble Dylan physically. So for me, it was like looking at a lot of photographs and trying to like distill that essence, like what did he feel comfortable in? How was it worn? You know, did he care about his appearance? You know, were there times that he looked natty versus, you know, totally drunk and out of it, disheveled? So I was able to kind of like distill that essence and then go to Rhys, who I think is like 6'4". So we had to make his clothes because literally you couldn't like go to a vintage store and buy something. So everything had to be custom made. And then, you know, all of his jackets, we had to soak them and put rocks in the pockets, roll them up, hang them, let everything kind of droop and sag. Because you figured this guy probably slept in these clothes a lot of the time, like passed out in them. So for an audience, like Steven's saying, it's an intuitive thing that, I mean, how many times have you looked at a character in a movie and said, how do they afford that leather jacket? That's like crazy. I don't believe that. So for me, that's kind of the essence of my work, that for you as an audience member, you never think about that. It's intuitively right. You feel like you're in the world with them at that moment and you believe it. And that to me is like the biggest challenge. You know, there's also how you work with the actor to get to those storytelling moments. And Romola was great. She was great. You know, we had wonderful communication. I have to say, all the actors on this show were down with it.
I had no idea that Molly did that to Rhys's suits. I just thought, wow. You went to a vintage store that was really bad, because this stuff just looks like he slept, which is fantastic because that's exactly what the character was doing, was drinking, sleeping his clothes, putting them on, and you captured that. I thought you had found them. I had no idea that you invented those clothes. Fantastic.
Because this is what the relationship between the director and the costume designer really is. And it's deep because the costume designer has to translate into costumes, right, visually, the big vision of the director. But for the director, it's really important, the work of the costume designer, because costumes define characters. Right. So this is what we wanted to say at the beginning.
Exactly right. And that all the while, look, I think that film is language. That's what people don't get. Because there's this myth that film is only storytelling. Film is storytelling. We're, as Molly really said earlier, we're storytellers. But also film works in a whole bunch of other ways to engage an audience. When you go to an art gallery and you look at a painting, that's also art, you're emotionally affected by a painting. There's no narrative there. You don't watch, oh, this guy's on one side of then he's there and he's there. It's just one painting, but you're engaged. You're engaged by the visual. You're engaged by the colors, although we didn't have any in ours. You're engaged by the composition. You're engaged by the relative perspective. And in film, we can also move the camera. these are all different languages that speak to an audience, what we call subtext, sending messages. And one of the key subtexts is absolutely to do with costume. And what Molly said about our principal character, Rhys Ifans, by the way, I know it's my own film, so I sound biased. It's the best performance I've ever seen by an actor on a film set in my career. I've worked on now nearly 100 feature films and television shows, and I've seen some great performances, including some one that won an Oscar. This is the most remarkable performance I've ever seen. First of all, the script has lots of words, big performances, but Rhys, holds the center stage for this entire movie. So defining this character is really what most of the film is about, trying to figure out who he is. So, as I said before, it's a mystery. All films are mysteries. And one of the place the audience looks to for clues is how this character dresses each day. So, the fact that this guy is probably, as Molly rightly says, sleeping in his clothes, the fact that he is disheveled, all these things speak to who he is. And yet, and this is the remarkable thing, it's the Jack Nicholson phenomenon. He was unbelievably charming and sexual at the same time. So here's Jack Nicholson, who's bald, I think, and yet you speak to virtually any woman in the world, they go, one of the sexiest men alive. Right. Dylan Thomas, the real life Dylan Thomas was, Molly will correct me, but I think he was sort of kind of short, right, kind of pudgy, and one of the sexiest men alive. Rhys Ifans is one of the sexiest men alive, but we were trying to creatively and poetically take this character and say, here's someone who's drunk, who may not have great personal hygiene, and part of the film he's vomiting, I think, and yet through all this disconnection, through all this chaos that is embodied in what he's wearing, he's still sexual. So to try to sexualize a character, to show their charisma, their seductive qualities, while at the same time saying that they're not trying too hard by wearing, had Tom Ford been around, a Tom Ford suit, was one of the challenges, and it works. You look at this guy and you go, what a mess, and yet, wow, I want to be with him.
Just because we feel something doesn't mean it's real.
I'm going to ask you if you want to die.
What a curious notion. And who can resist an audience? One must perform.
I'm a poet. I speak for us all.
The wise men at their end know dark is right. Brave men near death who see with blinding sight. Do not go gentle into that good path.
Thank you.
Why Dylan Thomas, and why the story of his last days?
Why was I drawn to Dylan Thomas? Because I was a lesser Dylan Thomas when I was young. I was very successful very early in my life, and couldn't for some reason enjoy it, and was hugely self-destructive. I don't know how I survived, but I did. But I was just self-destructing, ruining all my relationships, putting things in my body I shouldn't have been putting there, offending everyone, arrogantly pontificating, at the same time seducing, and seducing in the broadest sense, everybody and everything. Seducing with charm, through the use of language, whatever it was, through being dangerous, all these things in the search of some sort of sensation that would make me feel as if I was real, because I had this sense of constant artifice. And I found in my reading, because I've read a lot most of my life, that Dylan Thomas was the character I most related to. When I read him, I understood him. That the idea is that when you seduce the world, you don't always seduce people individually. Sometimes you seduce everybody simultaneously. And performers are nothing except the greatest seducers. When Mick Jagger is on stage, you're not thinking, oh, Mick Jagger's someone who I might have a great conversation with and so on. He seems like my kind of, he's seducing not only you, but the other 100,000 people are in the stadium at the same time. That is a group seduction. And yet, if you were to speak to Jagger or to Dylan or to anybody, he would say, all those people out there, do you care if they love you? Now, with great respect, I'm sure that they care in the sense they care about all humanity, but they don't feel really validated by people who don't know them. To be celebrated by people who don't know you is not to be validated. The great validation comes that people who really know you, who know your foibles, your weaknesses, your failures, your inadequacies. When your partners can look at you and say, I love you, not despite your failings, but because of them. That's the real validation. And Dylan Thomas had the love of the world because he seduced the world, but didn't find the real validation he needed from the genuine intimacy of revealing the true self.
Molly, I wanted to ask you also, how did you end up taking the role of the costume designer for this film?
My agent sent me the script to read, and I thought it was fascinating, and I thought the challenges of doing a period film were something I was excited about as well. So for me, I had been doing probably a lot of comedies, you know, sort of broad, and this was very intimate, and it's one of those movies where you got to get it right. You really do. So it took me out of a comfort zone when I read the script, and I thought it was a good challenge. And then of course I met Steven and, you know, had these really deep, productive discussions about character, which is not always the case on a job. Obviously, some directors love to do it. Others are just, you know, please deal with this star. They're a pain in the ass. I don't want to hear about it, you know. So there are many ways that you approach your work. But, you know, number one, I read the script. I thought it was great. It was going to be a real challenge for me to dig deep and make, you know, exactly right choices. So it's a good challenge. And when I met Steven, that sealed the deal for me. I was very happy he hired me. That was exciting.
How it was working? It was challenging working with your actors, with your stars, both for both of you, for both.
Well, on this particular movie, everyone, because of the nature of the story, for them to have made this kind of commitment to do this kind of, you know, small but really emotionally intense film, you're committed. You're not going to be building a swimming pool from doing this show, which I think, you know, people choose to do things for different reasons, but everyone on this film was very committed. And I found in all my initial conversations with them, they too were absolutely wanting to get it right, to tell the story of what was happening at each moment, any arcs in the way they looked. And I felt like they gave deep trust in my choices. So for me, it was a real pleasure. I never had a moment of like, oh my God, I have to drag this one to it. Everybody was.
It was a very, very happy
team. A lot of trust.
We all got along with each other very well. Molly's been very modest as usual, as is her nature. You got to realize we had I mean, we're not micro budget, but we only had a few million to do this film with. And to do a period film with big, you know, relatively big stars with no money affects certain departments more than others. Now, we reduced the size of the film by limiting locations. We did lots of other tricks, but it's not like I gave Molly a big budget. I remember, I think when she saw the budget figure, she's very charming, but I saw all the color drained appropriately for black and white film. It was the first black and white moment because the minute I told her what the budget was for wardrobe, all the color left her face. So it became black and white at that moment. I still don't know because, by the way, it wasn't just Rhys she had to costume and Romola. And we had John Malkovich as well. So this is a big cast. These are big actors who used to big budgets. And the fantastic Rodrigo Santoro, we'll talk about that later because he's a god as well. So if she had the costume, we're probably delighted in costuming as well. So all those things, but without money. And then we had these big crowd scenes. Now, these crowd scenes, Dylan Thomas went around the country reading poetry, and people would be fainting and screaming and throwing things and yelling their phone numbers out to him and so on. So we would have crowds of, I don't remember, was it hundreds of people, many hundreds of people, that was supposed to be 1953 America, and Molly had to costume him with no money. How did you do that?
Well, I went to every costume house in Montreal and kind of begged and wheedled and tried to compromise on prices. I have a lovely friend who has a warehouse in Pennsylvania, and luckily she had like a lot of things that I was able to rent because of personal relationships. So I was able to do a lot of rentals and whatnot. And then we found, it was kind of funny actually. Usually you go to a big costume tailor shop, they make all your clothes. But in Montreal, we go to this one's basement where he would do dyeing. And then this one who on the weekend would do the alterations on a wedding dress or a ball gown. And I remember doing this ball gown and I found a short, cheap dress at like a thrift store, but I had to find more fabric to make it into an evening dress with nice folds. So, I mean, it was a lot of begging.
That dress she's talking about was incredible. At the very end of the film, people should keep watching because the film finishes, the credits begin to roll, and then we hide this scene in the credits where John Malkovich was with a bunch of friends of his smoking cigars and saying horrible things, and the stunningly beautiful Romola Garai arrives. They're all in black and white, but she's in color.
Okay.
Nice. And the color is so intense and magnificent. And this dress is so, what was the dress made out of? It's not, this is what I know about costume. Is it
spoiler, no? We start with the spoilers.
Taffeta, satin. Yeah, and the guy who redraped it, I mean, literally, it was like a really inexpensive little thrift store short dress. And then I got all this fabric. And we've got it on the mannequin and we're twisting it and trying to hide things and reveal things. And I said, it's got to be glamorous. It has to be. But literally, we're in somebody's basement doing this. So.
Yeah, because costume designers are treasure hunters too. We have to say this. They have radar and treasure hunters.
Right, right. But you have to like start with, here's what my idea is and find the way to get there. And I think that's a lot of my job is that. I've got $20 for this dress. How do I get there?
The dress was magnificent. I mean, the dress could go, anywhere. So it was incredible. And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, she's going to be so over budget. That dress alone's got to be 10 grand. So I had no idea it was from a thrift store with some additional material and things. So, fortunately, Romola was an honest person. I've been on films before. I won't say which film. But where at the end of the film, the actress liked the costume so much that she backed her car up to the, to her trailer where a lot of the clothes had been left and was trying to make off with some of her clothing. Yeah. They had to stop in security and take them back because I guess there's rentals and there's borrows, but you have to return them in the end, don't you?
And the dress remains to you, Steven, because you are also the producer, or?
Well, there are a lot of producers, so we have to cut it into small. It's like the Judgment of Solomon. Each person would have to get a little piece of the fabric. So I think there's lots of my wife was one of the producers, Carolyn Rodney. And I suspect that she would look fantastic in that dress. So I don't know where it is.
She's amazing.
It's probably been reassembled somewhere. It's probably back to its short variety and things. But and also with the pandemic, we don't have much opportunity to wear fantastic ball gowns as we. Well, I guess we could. I guess I could encourage her to wear a ball gown around the house, which would be kind of fun. You know, I mean, for me anyway. So. Difficult to do the cooking and the shopping and the writing, but you know, it was a stunning dress and things. Very often, by the way the film's constructed, we have black and white and color in the same frame at the same time, and usually Romola's in color and all the other characters are in black and white. So there'd be scenes that appear where all the characters are in these shades of gray, and then suddenly Romola appears in these dresses. And for me, color is so very important because it provides separation from backgrounds. If you want to draw the eye of an audience to a character, I would, my general design as a cinematographer, I would encourage that character to be dressed in a different color or from a different part of the color wheel, and sometimes in primaries. One of the great things about that dress, if I remember it correctly, was it was a primary. Was it a red? It was red. It was red. It was a primary color. So those primaries really jump off the screen. And of course, in terms of the way the camera works, you know, certain colors move towards the camera and certain ones seem to recede. Red is one of those colors that seems to move towards a camera. It seems like an object's closer when it's red, whereas blues and greens tend to recede. So when you use a primary, it's very interesting for an audience because right away the eye goes to that primary, and the audience focuses on that. So when you combine a primary with black and white, then it becomes this surreal and very, you know, evocative image. So many people don't realize how central to the experience of film costume is. It affects not only the character in terms of you're defining the character by what they wear, like what Molly was saying about putting the rocks in the pocket and so on to make the suit, but also where you force the audience to look is very often determined by the color you dress the character in. So you can really, as a costumer, decide how important the character is in a scene just by what color they are wearing.
Yeah. Next question for you, Steven. How deep was your trip into Dylan Thomas' worlds in order to fully understand his visionary and self-destructive genius, and how psychological was difficult for you? If it was difficult, I presume it was difficult, maybe.
Well, look, I've got a process that is to do with how I write generally, which is I don't write, I dictate. And I never write to an outline, and I never write to a structure. I am trying to eliminate all the impediments to free creative expression that I can. So I will put a microphone on that sits on my neck. I'll go for a walk here in the mountains of Ojai at the moment, which is north of Los Angeles, and I'll walk and I will talk and I will dictate. And sometimes my dialogue will be between two characters who never end up in the movie. And it might go for 20 pages. And the first draft of the script might be 300 pages long. The reason I do all that is I discover what I mean by writing. I can't know what I mean to write before I write it. And if I try to structure anything before I do it, I really crush my own creative spontaneity. I have to write so I know what I think. And so it is with creating a character as well. If I do too much research on a character, an historical character, I begin creating a documentary. And I am not a documentary filmmaker. I am trying to find the spirit of the character or the spirit of an idea, not to retell their story. So this is not, oddly, a biographical film. This is a film inspired by an artist that ruminates on the idea of what I mentioned before, of seduction and of fame. I am always struck by the nature of fame, how people, when you're famous, how people think they know you, how you're valuable because you're famous, or not valuable because you're not. Those are some of the things that I was particularly interested and examining. So ultimately, the film is about those issues rather than about a retelling of Dylan Thomas's life. It's very frustrating for me because when I read the reviews, people say great film, great performances, but I'm not sure if this is an accurate retelling of Dylan Thomas's life. Well, of course it's not. It's art. You know, when people look at a painting, do they say, I wonder if Napoleon really looked at that like that, you know, and therefore we should judge the painting by the accuracy of the rendering of Napoleon. When we go to the opera, do we say, I'm not sure if this really, you know, when people living in a little garret in Paris in La Boheme, this is what garret really looked like? You know, I don't think so. It's not about historical authenticity. It's about engagement, about ideas. As artists, we're about ideas. We're not about replication. We're not here to duplicate experiences. Molly rightly pointed out, one of the first dilemmas I presented her with was Dylan Thomas was short and round, and Rhys Ifans is 6'4" and long. But it didn't matter to me because Rhys captured the essence of who this character was that I created, a poet who was tortured and driven by not being able to ultimately affirm his own humanity because the people he loved, who loved him, he didn't care about because he had seduced them. It's the dishonest proposition that is the basis of all fame and celebrity. The people we worship, we don't know. So why should we worship him? The people who are in our immediate circle, we think you're far less perfect than the famous because we know your imperfections. It's only all humans are humans. All people are imperfect. The ones that seem perfect are the ones that we don't know. So for me, it was about knowing as little about. I'd read him my whole life. I read poetry. I write poetry. So I knew the essence of the person. I had read his own books. I had read his wife's books, which are ruthless about him, Catelyn. And I read all those, and then I tried to forget them, and then write about what mattered to me as a sentient human being, not to try to do a retelling of Dylan Thomas. I wanted to write something that was contemporary, that would make a difference to all of us, not people looking for a historical understanding of a long dead poet.
Molly, you did a lot of contemporary costumes, contemporary movies. This is a period movie. Do you find working on period movie easier since you have precise historical references? Or maybe not?
No, you're right. When you're doing a period film, there is a framework where certainly in the 50s, certain colors just didn't exist. People didn't use them. So you have to be aware of that. And there are certain proprieties that for a woman going to the hairdresser, how she looked, how she went shopping versus cleaning the house versus going to a gala. So you do have a framework. And, you know, within that framework, just when Steven was talking, when I was working on Rhys's clothes, kind of the chaos of his life, for me, it meant I had to inject a lot of different textures, because you look at John Malkovich and everything is very smooth and the medical coat and it's all very groomed, but I tried to use a lot of different like patterning. So you got that kind of kinetic energy that was happening. So within the framework of, yes, men wore jackets, ties, shirts, sweaters, you know what that is. So, but it doesn't need to limit you. You still use your imagination and try to understand, how would this woman want to be seen? How does Penny, the young girl, how does she's coming into womanhood, you know, she thinks of herself as very sophisticated in a way, you know, and intellectual, versus her boyfriend, you know, he's more casual, a little bit more rougher. I remember we found this great sweater for him that was maybe a little too small, but I kept saying, it's perfect. We have to stretch it because
You have
there
to
was
believe
something
it.
about the texture of it, which just said to me, you know, this is who this young man is, like edging towards adulthood and being the guy in her life. So yeah, a lot of it, I have to say, it's just intuition on my part where I see something and I know emotionally it affects me. And oftentimes that is texture or color. And I know how that affects me. Or you said you liked As Good as It Gets. I remember Helen Hunt coming in for a fitting and she tried this blouse on and it was like too tight here. You know how the buttons can be too tight? And it was kind of gapping. And we were looking at it and I said, Helen, every woman in the world understands that blouse because you're too caught up in what's going on with your son. You're like crazed with your economic problems, his health. That blouse not fitting signals to everyone what's happening in your world. So I think as a costume designer, those are the things that I'm always thinking about, or I'm thinking about that object of desire that's deep in their heart. And maybe they don't tell anybody about it, but maybe it's that they're wearing a red slip under their black uniform, you know, things like that. And that's very helpful to actors as well. Like finding a secret that they can carry when they go out to perform. And maybe the audience never even sees it, but it's fun to do that with serious performers. You know, it gives them a little edge.
Any strange requests from the actors for the costumes? If you can mention. Because we have the director with us and I don't know if.
Not really. I mean, we certainly with our Carlos, the bartender, I mean, he is like to drop dead handsome, you know, and I wanted something very high contrast for him, although, you know, he's basically in a white shirt and black pants. So we added those suspenders and I thought this just gives it that little bit of verve that, you know, was kind of great and helped because he had like an amazing physique. So, you know, you have the very narrow waist and the shirt is a little more billowing, but the suspenders cage it in a way. So they define how handsome, how well built he is. So yeah, that it's like we put the shirt and pants on and went, it's not enough. So, you know, we had to add things. And, you know, actors feel that as well, you know, and they want to know from me, is she going to protect me? Is she really got my back in this? That when I go out there, this is just what it should be. And I felt that way with every actor. They were very easy to work with, very smart people.
I love what you did with Tony Hale. Tony Hale plays, was a fantastic comedian, but also a very good serious actor, but he plays Dylan Thomas's publicist. Somehow you got that that character was so defined by the way you dressed him. Very kind of buttoned down, I guess, the way you describe it, but his suits were all not really stylish, but very formal. Or I don't know exactly what you did with him, but it was incredible.
Yeah, Tony, I mean, for him, such a brilliant comedian. And he's so soulful. I mean, it took my breath away to watch him. But we wanted suits that made him feel professional, businesslike. You know, here he was with this brilliant genius of a man. So he was trying to make his stature as strong as he could, but he's kind of a jalab in a way. So, you know, there's trying to find out what would he wear to make himself feel confident dealing with Dylan Thomas.
Yeah. And what about Rhys Ifans? I love him. I'm a huge fan of him, and he's so unbelievable. So how was it to work with him? It's a fun question.
He has
He's
these
really
super
tall.
long arms, right? And one of his major concerns, and he was like, I'm just a problem for you, he said, to get my sleeves long enough. So we had to make his shirts even to get the sleeves long enough. So I think for him, I don't remember any specific issues other than, I mean, he got it. I'm sure this is a continuing story for him on every show he does, is because he's so tall. And particularly for a period film, finding clothes that will fit him is a challenge. So, but he was great. I mean, it was.
I really love him.
Tall with very long
I like
arms.
him.
Yeah. So, and it was like getting the collars of the shirts right, you know, for the period, and yet having everything be kind of soft enough so that it just felt like we were talking about, that he sleeps in his clothes, he doesn't really care, he's smoking, he's drinking, he's dropping ashes on himself, you know, and pontificating at the same time.
And a great contrast with Malkovich as well, because again, Malkovich buttoned down in a very different way than you have Tony buttoned down. Tony's suits always seem a little bit large on him, and like it looks like Tony's trying to dress up to be something that he isn't. Whereas Malkovich, he wears the clothes rather than the clothes wear him, which is kind of fantastic. It's just, you had him in a dinner jacket in one sequence. He's just so elegant. Even when he's in the hospital theater doing that autopsy, he's tearing a body apart off camera, which is one of the funniest scenes in the film. But he's in this fantastic lab coat that's perfectly fitted. And John, of course, as you may know, owns a clothing company. He designs his own clothes, which he sells, you know, in a lot of places, particularly in France. Did John give you a lot of input about what he wanted, or what was the exchange like with him? Because he's a dear friend and one of our producers, and I adore him.
Well, as you may remember, I had to haul 2 incredibly heavy suitcases on the train from New York to Boston to go to his house and then drag them up the stairs.
I didn't know that. Did you? You went all the way to Boston. It's really fantastic.
I opened them up, and, you know, we had suits and things, and he's very specific about details. But everything he had to say made perfect sense. And I designed his lab coat because it's not something you could buy off the rack. And we knew exactly, you know, where we wanted the belt to be, the buttons. So, I mean, he's so smart about film. He knows exactly where the lapel should hit. And so he was very specific, but not in a uncommunicative way. It was helpful. And, you know, he's a great artist, and he knows a lot about clothes, and, you know, little details like how the pocket handkerchief is folded. You know, he had ideas about that were very in tune with his character and what was going on. So, yeah, I mean, some actors really understand clothing, and that can be very helpful. And other people are like, I'm at sea, you know, do whatever. So
John is very detail oriented. I know that before you arrived, he had written out the entire script, not just his lines, but the whole script in longhand. He wrote it out, and then he bound it, and had memorized the entire script, not just his lines, but everyone else's lines. So that at any point in the film, other people would be looking at their notes and their what we call the sides, the script they carry. Not John. He would, and even sometimes, I don't know if I should admit this, would say to another actor, the line was. I mean, rarely would he would always respectfully, but when our continuity person couldn't jump in quick enough, John would very gently just provide the prompt. I mean, always respectfully, and never tell them how to read the line. But it just went to the fact that he had memorized the entire script by writing out in longhand. So that's sort of the detail that you see with great actors.
Very impressive. Steven, After a long and successful career as a cinematographer, this is your third work as a director, yes? This was the second, okay, the second one. What prompted you to switch to the directing?
Well, of course, I've direct television and I've direct commercials as well, but my second feature film, absolutely. Look, I had started this very odd career, and I think ultimately, if we look at all of our lives are odd. My career, like Benjamin Button's, ran backwards in that I was trained first as a writer and director, and then went the other way. You know, rather than going up the ladder, I was going, I guess I would say down, because cinematography is a very important art, but I was going the other direction because of the accident music videos, then commercials, and you know, success very often leads us down paths that we never intended to go. And Los Angeles is a place you come to where you buy things you never wanted, and then do jobs that you don't want to pay for the things you never wanted. So, you know, I bought lots of very expensive, I bought an airplane, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff. And what was I doing? And then I had to take bigger and bigger movies and shoot more and more commercials, and to make lots more money to pay for the things that I never really wanted in the first place. So for me, it was a return to where I began, which is, to me, the sacred craft, which is creative expression. And for me, cinematography is always a delight. I love everything about lighting and color and composition, but most of all, I love writing and then engaging with actors and discovering the nature of character.
This is a question for both of you, because both of you has a very, very impressive career. So looking back over your career, I don't know who wants to start, Steven or Molly, but looking back over your career, what was one memorable learning experience that you still use today? Who wants to start?
Wow. I guess I remember when I was doing my first big break was broadcast news, and working with the director, who is a very singular person. And we would go to dailies every night, and we would shoot like 16-hour days. Then you'd have to go to dailies. And at 11 o'clock at night, he would look at me and say, tomorrow, I want Albert Brooks to be wearing a yellow vest. And the show, and it's at 6 a.m., right? And I was like, oh my God. At the time we were shooting in Washington, D.C., and my parents lived there. And my father, who was a little bit heavy set, I called him and I said, I know you must have a yellow knit vest. He said, I do. And I went over and got it. And I've always believed that somehow they're like wardrobe gods watching over me. So the lesson I learned is never just say no out of hand. Always like try to achieve the best solution. And don't be a naysayer. Always be the one who, if you can't get that yellow vest, what can you get that's close to it? And I think it was a really important thing to learn, and something that stayed with me. And I know when other people are like, oh no, we can't do that, you know, don't say no, because sometimes you'll work with a director who has a brilliant, better idea than what you agreed upon 2 months ago. And you need to be willing and open to say, I'm here to serve your vision, and what can I do to satisfy that, to go with what you want to do here? So don't get so set in your ways that, you know, once we sign off, it's done. Making a film or a TV show is a living organism, and it's always breathing. And if an actor calls you to the set and says, Molly, I know I agreed to this 6 months ago, but I feel like where I'm at right now, it's not right. I'm not feeling it. What can we do? Well, you know, you can't get crazed. You have to say, this is part of the creative process. And I want to be part of that creative process. And so that's something I learned early on.
Steven?
Well, for me, I think it was, I came to a crisis. I just shot the big action stuff on SWAT and 23 cameras and this huge crew and things. Then before I was even finished, I got a call to come down and do Monster in Florida. And there was a bit of overlap, but I read the script and spoke to Patty and then Charlize. And I thought, wow, this seems quite special. And I've been on SWAT for so long. Would they mind if I left a little bit early? And they let me go. And I went down there and I said, oh, this is a mistake. It's low budget. I'm not earning as much money as I was before. And then I watched Charlize and Patty's obsessional dedication to something they believed in. And one producer, most of the producers were great. There's one producer kept bringing me up and saying, hey, that lovemaking scene between Charlize and Christina Ricci, you got two of the most beautiful women in the world. And forgive my vulgarity, I don't know if this is going on with children or not, but is it okay? They said, we can't see their tits. What were you thinking? You got these beautiful women, can't see. This is going to go straight to video, this film. And if we can't see the tits, we're not going to be able to sell this film. You got to tell the director it's got to be reshot. And I said, oh, I don't think we want to read that. I think it's about love. I don't think it's about tits. And they go, no, love. You can't sell love on a video box, he said to me, which I wrote down to put in a script someday, which I haven't, but I will. You can't put love in a video box. Flash forward, we're at the Berlin Film Festival, and everyone thought it's a little movie, and it was picking up a little bit of steam and a little bit of steam. There's gonna be a press conference. We figured there's gonna be 25 journalists, and we walk into this room, and there's 1,800 journalists there. And it's like sometimes life resembles art, and then you really think that you're living the real life because it resembles your imagined life. So suddenly I'm in a movie, I'm in a press conference with all these flash bulbs going off, and not flash bulbs, with electronic flashes, and people yelling questions at microphones, and the room's so full of people that it's like overwhelming. And one of these producers, this particular producer may or may not have been on that panel. I'm getting myself in all sorts of trouble. And we're going down the panel, we're just talking about it. And then this producer says, I always believed in this film. And sometimes you just have to invest in ideas, even though they may not seem commercial. And of course, the film went on to earn $100 million and win the Oscar. And there's two things I thought at that moment. First of all, it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is the publicity you create about it afterwards. But the other thing, it goes to the integrity of vision. Because Patty and Charlize believed absolutely in what they were doing. Charlize is one of the most beautiful women in the world. I remember when she got all dressed up one night for one of the functions at Berlin, I literally couldn't look at her because I never saw anything so beautiful in my life. It was so perfect on every form. And I thought, this is the same woman I was shooting the film with, who would wear the same clothes every day, was chain smoking, rolled up cigarettes, had put on 40 pounds, and was absolutely disgusting. And I realized that she was so dedicated to her craft and to her vision and her belief in bigger issues than her beauty, that sometimes these are the things you invest in, because these are these things that transform your life. And I dedicated myself from that moment forward to doing things that mattered. Look, Last Call is a film that is an art film. It's about our lives. It's about big issues. It's about pain. It's about failed relationships. It's not a musical comedy, although there's a lot of comedy in it, because even our tragic lives are funny. But it's about important things that matter. And I only want to do films about important things that matter. And I learned that from Charlize, and I learned that from Patty. And I learned that from that producer who was telling us to shoot tits and that love can be put on a video box. I think it can. I just don't think we always realize that. And I think I'd rather make a film about love than about a bunch of other things.
So we really thank you for being with us.